this is Chess Master Vincent Huang, and I'm here to teach on the middle game, some basic concepts that are very important. And this video is designed for students who are just past the beginner level and trying to get onto the intermediate level. They should know checkmate in 1, not checkmate in 2 yet. They should be quite familiar with how the pieces move, and that should be enough to start this lesson. Alright, so to begin, we're going to start with a quick review on just very basic stuff: checkmate, check, capture, and threat. Okay, so I've set up this position, and we want to checkmate black in one move here. So why don't you spend some time and look for the move, and if you need more time, just press pause at any moment in this video. Okay, so the correct move would be for queen to take g7, and this is checkmate because the queen attacks the king and places the opponent's king in check, and this king cannot escape. Basically, if this king runs, say it runs to h8, the queen, as you know how it moves, can capture the king on h8. If the king goes to h7, the queen can still capture it. The king cannot take its own piece, and so the king cannot go to f7. And if the king goes to f8, the queen can still capture it. Now, you might also wonder what happens if the black king captures the white queen, because the black king can take any piece one square around itself. So let's just do this really quickly. King takes queen. Now, if you look at the entire board, you'll notice that white still has a bishop at the very bottom here. And this bishop attacks the king at this moment. And that's why the king cannot capture the queen, or else this places the king in check. And all this verifies that this is checkmate. Okay, so we're going to move on to review the next concept, which is just basic checks. Okay, so right now I just want you to find the only check in the position that would not lose any material. Okay, so the correct move would be queen g4, and this is just a very basic check in that the queen attacks in any straight lines or along any diagonals, and so this places the opponent king in check. It is not checkmate because the enemy king can escape to a number of squares. It cannot escape to h8 because this bishop back here is still attacking the king there. It can escape to h7. It cannot escape because there's nothing attacking this square. The king cannot escape to g7 because the queen is still attacking that square. The king cannot take its own piece, as that is against the rules of chess. And the king can go to f8, where it will be safe because no piece is attacking it. Okay, so next we're going to go to captures. Okay, so in this position, give me a second. White has a number of captures. At the moment, you just want to look at every single piece and where they could potentially move. And to start off, the queen can take this knight because it moves in a straight line. It can take this piece because it's along its diagonal. And then we can look at this knight, and since the knight moves in an L shape, this knight can take that bishop. In addition, this knight can take this pawn because it's also an L shape with one, two, one direction, and then one up. Besides that, there are no captures in this position, and it's just good to know that you can capture these pieces in that fashion. Okay, to review the final thing, which is threats. Okay, so as you know, when the queen was here, we had checkmate. So if you're trying to win the game, which you always are when you're playing chess, you want to threaten checkmate. And that works simply by moving your queen to a position or a piece to a position in which you can get checkmate in the next move. So basically, if white had 2 moves, it would be checkmate. White would be able to get check. If white was able to get 2 moves and black could not respond, then white would get checkmate in 2 moves. And that's simply this, 1, and then 2. Okay, so that's it for our review, and now we're going to go on to the main concepts that we're going to learn today. So getting into the main lesson today, we're going to cover the middle game concepts of order of force, number 1, the point system, number 2, and positioning of pieces, number 3. Okay, so to start things off, the order of force is basically moves that make your opponent respond, that force your opponent to respond in certain ways. So, for example, if you checkmate your opponent, which is the number 1 force, then your opponent cannot respond. It's game over and you win, which is the goal of the game. Number 2 is check, and this places your opponent with limited options. Basically, he must respond to your check. And number 3 is capture, which is when you take one of his pieces and remove it from the game. Number 4 is threat, in which you make a move that threatens to capture, which threatens to capture a piece. And moving on to the point system, important things to get familiar with and memorize if you can are that the queen equals 9 points. Okay, the rook equals 5 points, the bishop equals 3.5 points, the knight equals 3 points, the pawn equals 1 point, and the king equals infinity. This point system is based on how valuable each piece is. Basically, when you're playing a game, if you have a queen and your opponent only has a rook, then you are winning because you have more points. And in order to win the game, usually you want to get as many points and accumulate as many points as you can until you reach checkmate. And the third concept is positioning of pieces. Basically, you want to make moves that have certain threats to them, or there's certain plan behind every single move you make. And if you do all this, you will get closer to the intermediate level very quickly. And now we're going to show some examples. So here's our first example, and it's on the order of force. And as you remember, as I just said, it consists of checkmate, check, capture, and threat. So if we're going to start with this position. So as you can see, white has, materially, they're equal right now. Materially, they are equal right now. And white is trying to win this game here. The novice will begin, and he will see directly in the middle of the board and see that, oh, I can capture this queen. He sees, oh, I can capture with my own queen, I can capture with my pawn. So obviously, if I take it with my pawn, that's easy free piece. If I take it with my queen, then the knight can capture back, and that will not be as effective as finding something like checkmate. So the novice will keep thinking and see that, oh, I can still capture this, I can capture this, I can capture this. You'll see all these threats, but because he does not know the order of force, he will not think in the correct systematic fashion. The best way to start is to always look for checkmate before threats. So if you have a checkmate, you should look for that before you look for check or captures. So in this position, if you spend a little time, you will be able to find checkmate in one move. And basically, I'll give you a moment right now to find checkmate in one. Alright, so the correct move would be queen takes h7. And this is checkmate, because the king cannot escape to f8 where the rook, its own rook is, f7 because the pawn, g7 because it cannot capture its own pawn, or h8 because the queen can capture the king on h8. Again, if the king captures the queen on h7, then the bishop will capture the king, and that's why this is checkmate. Now, that's why it's very important to think systematically. Always look for checkmate first, and then check, then capture, then threat. If the novice player would not have seen this, and so he would have had to play another 30 moves or so to finally finish the game. And finding checkmate, just like this, simplifies the game for white and also makes it much easier for him. Okay, so moving on to our next example. Okay, so this is our second example, and it's important to note that we're looking from black's perspective here. So if it's black's turn and say he moves here, you must realize that you cannot capture the queen because check goes before capture. So basically, this check forces white to respond in with his few options. Because this knight is attacking the king in this L shape, the king must either move away or capture. So since the knight cannot be blocked, and it cannot be captured by any of white's pieces, black can only move the king. The novice player might consider taking the queen again, because he's really excited to win that queen and win the game. But you must realize that check precedes captures, and that's why this check must be dealt with more immediately. Okay, so moving on to our second concept, which is the point system, as shown before. You must, at every point in the game, you should consider adding up your points and figuring out who is winning, and from there you can figure out the right plan to move on and win the game. So, we're going to start this. Alright, so in this position, it may not be clear at first, but white is winning. He is winning because if you add up all your points, or if you sort of cancel out points, say you just remove these pawns, which are each 1 point, and keep doing it in your head. You will notice that white has a queen for a bishop. And basically, this tells you that white is winning. And to get to the points, how this relates to the point system is that the queen is worth 9 points, and the bishop is worth 3. And because of this, white is up 6 points. Usually when you're up more than 3 points, especially at the beginner level, you are well ahead, and you should look for opportunities to win the game by checkmate and such. Okay, so moving on. Besides counting up your points with the pieces, you also want to consider when you exchange pieces. For example, Alright, so in this position, we are playing from black's perspective. And basically, he has a number of options. And if we go through the first concept we learned, which is the order of force, we will realize that there is no checkmate in this position for black in one move. Because this knight blocks this queen from getting there, there is no checkmate. Next, we look at the number 2 thing, which is check. And if we look closely, we will realize that there is no way to check white's king here. And then the third step, which is capture. It gets more, this part of the order of force makes it much more complicated. First, we want to look at all our major pieces. So first, we look at our queen. So what can the queen capture? Give you a few moments to get the answer. The queen can capture the knight here, because it moves along a diagonal. The queen can capture the rook here, because the queen moves in a straight line. The queen can also capture the pawn here. Now, upon further examination, you'll realize that if the queen captures the knight here, white can capture it back with a pawn. So now, let's just do some quick math. Okay, so we learned before that the queen is 9 points, and the knight is 3 points. So from that, we realized that black has lost his queen, which is 9 points, and white has lost his knight. So basically, black has lost more points than white has lost, and that means by 6 points. And that means that this is not a good trade for black. It's not a good idea for black to capture this piece. Again, we look at queen takes rook here, and although the novice player may be excited because the queen attacks the king like this, and the queen attacks the king in this position, but if you look more closely, the rook can capture back. And if we, again, just look at the 2 pieces that were exchanged, you'll see that it's queen for rook, and because the queen is 9 points and the rook is 5, black has lost more than he has gained. And basically, this is also a bad idea for black. Going on to the third capture, queen takes here, and again, you have to look, white can capture back. And if you do this again, you'll realize this is also a terrible idea for black. Okay, so moving on, say the queen was in this position. Black will now look for additional captures, and if you do a capture such as this, rook takes rook, you realize rook can take back, and you'll see that they're both the same piece. So this exchange, black lost 5 points, but also gained 5 points. So basically, this is a perfectly fine move. There's no problem because he has traded his forces and has not lost anything. Okay, moving on to additional captures. The knight can take this pawn here because it moves in an L shape, but again, the pawn can capture back. And because the knight is worth 3 points and the pawn is worth 1 point, this is also a bad idea for black. Okay, so the very last capture in this position is the bishop capturing this pawn. Again, white can capture back with his queen. And if you look closely, you see that a bishop for a pawn is also not a good idea for black, because this is 3 points and that is 1 pawn. So with all that in mind, we'll go on to a slightly different position. And in this position, if black captures the queen like this, and the rook captures back, then you'll see that black has lost 5 points, but gained 9 points. And because that is a positive difference of 4, you'll realize that this is a good trade for black. And so if you have the opportunity in game to make a move like this, which gets you points, then that is a good idea. Lastly, with the same concept in mind, if the rook, looking at this capture, the rook takes the knight, and when you're thinking of white's responses, you'll realize that white cannot capture back. And because you have gained a piece without losing anything, then this is a good capture. And because the knight is worth 3 points, you have just gained 3 points. And basically, this idea is important to know the relative values of the pieces. And with that, you should be able to move on to checkmate.